Hey everybody, today I'm here with Chloe Macintosh, the founder and CEO of Comma, an app, comma.lab. Yeah, maybe Chloe, I'll let you explain a little bit what it is and what you've been exploring.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. So yeah, Comma is an educational platform that helps people reconnect with pleasure as a modality for well-being. It's the idea that when we experience pleasure, we are more connected to our body, we can get out of our heads, and that actually could be an avenue for people to explore better connection with themselves, and then that can have then a positive knock-on effect on our relationship with others. I launched an application on both app stores early to 2020, and the app has been running since as a paid product, and it's really designed as a library of exploration, where whether you know what you're looking for, there's a problem you want to solve, you want to last longer, you want to be more connected during sex, you want to learn how to build sexual tension, and you don't know how to do that, or you don't know how to start your journey with bettering your sexual well-being. And you can go to the app and start tapping into different types of topics.
Very cool. And what was for you the genesis of this project? What led you to want to focus on this? You say it's kind of a recent thing for you, actually.
Well, I actually started to get really deeply interested in the field of sexuality and intimacy when I got pregnant with my son, who's 19 now. And it is through the transformation of my own body during pregnancy that it became quite clear to me that I had never really asked myself fundamental questions about my body and pleasure and what happens and sexuality and hormones and cycles. And it's at that time that I started the research part. You know, I researched this industry for a very long time before understanding what product could be a point of contact with people, because as you know, within the sex space, there is either a lot of pornography, and we know where to find it, and it's a lot of people going towards those websites. And then we have medical platforms that are there to prevent for things, negative things that happen at the back of having sex, etc. But there was never really any brands or destination or platform that were destined for you and I to continue to learn and evolve our sexuality. It's actually quite difficult to find resources for improving your sex life and your relational life. So it is really maybe 15 years into my research that I started to touch what I think now is really the core of the interest, which is looking at sexuality not as who we're having sex with, but looking at sexuality as who we are as individual, and how our sexuality, our relationship to our body is such an important indicator of our overall well-being and the way that we relate to ourselves. And it is in that realization that I felt actually having this resource on an app, letting people explore in the privacy of an application and starting to inform themselves, was the product that would help people bridge, you know, from the question to some answers.
Very cool. Yeah, well, I mean, for context, you and I met at Medicine Festival in England with our amazing friends, Beta and Melissa, and we had some incredible talks. I know that I'm going to wish that I could remember, because you went on some great riffs during those talks, and that's kind of like inspired me to want to follow up and get to know you better, and also have this, this chat and so on. If you remember, as we're talking, what those particular riffs were, I remember there were a couple of very good ones. But let's sort of start with, how do you see, you mentioned a little bit, like, so this is the area of sexual wellness. Like, how do you see the state of sexual wellness in the world today? And I guess there's different cultures and societies. Like, you live in Ibiza, that's one kind of culture that probably has an attitude or an ambiance on sexual wellness. And there's more like, generic middle-class culture and then working-class cultures. And yeah, what are you seeing in the world, and what's your view on what needs to happen?
Well, I think first, wellness, I think, is a very interesting space, because wellness should be what you do every day to prevent bad things to happen. It's a way of life, is how we change our habits to change our reality in some ways. And, we started with physical wellness. We realized we were not well physically. We actually have to exercise and eat better. And then we became not so healthy in the head. And then mental wellness became a thing. And so sexual wellness is also a sign that something isn't really integral, to how it could be for us as an experience. So initially, wellness is actually still trying to solve a problem rather than actually giving you, initiating like a way of life where young people would be invited, maybe the way you and I haven't in our generation, to really explore pleasure, their body, sexuality with a much more, with encouraging them and giving them permission rather than operating from shame and guilt, which is often the tension that we experience, when we think or explore sexuality. We're confronted with our limitations, our emotional blocks, the trauma that we may have, the lack of connection we may feel with our body, the lack of ability that we have to connect and be intimate, maybe because of the expansion and transformation in the way that we use communication through like text, for example. It doesn't really help people connect in real life. So I feel that statistically, we are having a lot less sex than we have in the past, let's say in the 60s, 70s. So I'm looking at relatively short span. So there is definitely, yeah.
That across all age groups? I thought that was mainly like younger people or maybe,
Yes, it is younger people. One of the most consistent statistics is that people over 50 are having the best sex of their life, usually. So that's been consistent. There is a really interesting body of research that's done called Singles in America, that's done by one of the big dating platforms. And they often and regularly report that, older people actually are quite satisfied with the way that they have sex. And you're right, the digital, kind of transformation that has happened since maybe the launch of the iPhone in 2007 is that a lot of the social curves or the way that we report how things are going from an individual relational way haven't improved greatly. People feel more disconnected and struggling to be intimate. So on one end, there is pornography came as a disruptor because it's now the main source of information and education around sex. There is also mainstream media that represents in all of the mainstream films a type of sexuality where we get really excited, we kiss, all our clothes goes off, and then we have sex with our hands. Suddenly we're penetrating each other and there's no touch, there is no communication, there is no foreplay. And then the next morning, everyone is happy. Hopefully we had an orgasm together. And that's still kind of what the most films, even the smart films, represent in terms of sexuality. So there is a lot of gaps. I think that sexuality, I feel, is one of the few things in our life that hasn't evolved positively. The place of women has evolved. There is more openness in the way of relationship and identification, but the way we're having sex hasn't really formed away from a very reproductive, the majority of the sex that people are having.
Yeah. Let's talk about shame a little bit. I heard you on another podcast and you were talking about the prevalence of shame. Why is that? And also you're from, I guess, France. It's supposed to be a more liberated society around sexuality, but is shame still like a major force? And why is it there? Why is it so hard for us to deal with?
Well, I definitely believe that institutions, religions, have contributed greatly to separate ourselves. It's almost like if you wanted to be spiritual, religious, you cannot incorporate your sexual energy, your sexual desire. It's almost been like always that you have to cut it off. And actually, most religious practices do not include the bottom two chakra. You kind of working, from the heart upwards. And so whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I do feel that it has created shame around why can't this energy be integrated? What's wrong about them that they can't be integrated? And what's wrong about them is because we have lost the knowledge and the practice around this idea that sexual energy isn't just to have sex. Sexual energy is also life force, and it's also chi, and it's also prana, and it's a very powerful force inside us that, when cultivated, gives us a lot of, potential for self-healing, for self-actualizing. And these experiences are not necessarily conducive to having people oppress and control you. So there has been, I think, a voluntary separation, and the shame has been used to make us feel bad about building this connection with our sexual energy, about questioning our desires, about accepting our fantasies, which come, as you know, from complex programming from childhood, for example. So it's not like we can really control our fantasies. They are what they are. And so the fact that we have shame around pleasure, that pleasure still feels very much an indulgence. People think I can allow myself pleasure when I've done everything else. It's definitely not something that we prioritize. There is still not a single doctor for pleasure. All the doctors help you not to have pain, but none of them help you to have more pleasure. And yet pleasure is a very important part of what the human body can create. Like, if we can have infinite pleasure, it surely is something that's good for us. So I feel that it's the shame is a narrative that we have inherited from past generations and past ways of thinking. And then it gets reinforced with things like, even between women, there's a lot of shame. If a woman behaves a certain way, other women might judge her for being sexual or provocative or using her body in a certain way. So we almost project and judge others, but usually it's only a reflection of what we don't accept about ourselves. I realized over this period of evolution and research and experimentation, how many layers of construct and conditioning and shame I was carrying. Some of them were from my education as a good Parisian, young woman, and you can't do this and you can't behave like this, and a woman does not let herself down. You have to be always in control of yourself. So I think there is definitely still today. I was talking to some girlfriends of my son who's 19, and we had a nice user group here, actually sitting just behind me. And they were saying to me that they still don't feel invited to masturbate as women, the same way it's very common for that conversation to happen amongst boys. And that as a young sexual woman, she still feels that there was a lot of judgment and there was a lot of shame. And in my work, actually, there is a series of training that you can take, which reconcile you with your sluts and your whore, and actually you go into each archetype and you allow yourself to be all of these facets, because that's how we can reconcile them and actually stop having the shame, have more acceptance, and therefore stop judging others. And we don't often do that work. We carry that shame often throughout most of our life.
Very cool. What's your perspective on changing relationship patterns? I mean, there seems to be a sense that the monogamous couple is becoming sort of less the focus, or it's obviously many people are still in monogamous partnerships, but I mean, actually, I just hung out with a beautiful friend of mine who's in her early 30s, and she's in a relationship that she's trying to maybe get out of, but she said she doesn't even have any friends. All of her women friends are single, and all looking for that sort of perfect partnership. So it feels like we're going through some kind of like awkward, difficult transition in relationship pattern where nobody really knows where like the safe, secure lighthouse is, in a way.
Yeah, and I think this is also not just that. I think it's there's a lot of things that happen. Esther Perel talks about this. The way that we look at partnership has changed. We want a lot more from our partners, but yet we are not. I mean, we are, but for a long time we were not doing that much work on ourselves. So my view is always, if you want to be in a monogamous relationship and be true to yourself and true to your partner, and if you want really that to last, the amount of work you're going to have to do on yourself is great, because you are going to be you need to be able to pass the different challenges of your own evolution within a relationship, and how the relationship has to constantly evolve to adapt to you changing is something that often we don't do. It's a little bit unconscious. We're in a relationship, we agree we're going to be together forever, and then we just expect things to work out. And then when it doesn't, we go and see, let's say, a couple therapist or counselor, which isn't really much of a solution, when often what's needed is that the couple does not know anymore how to connect, and does not actually know necessarily what happens. So I find that with monogamous relationship, the question is more that there are many different agreements that you could create with your partner, and that it's not one fit all model. And agreements means that you actually have a conscious conversation and write down, well, what are your needs? And what are your desires? And does this agreement allow for this to come together? You know, because if we don't do this consciously, we'll end up with, well, I always wanted to eventually open the relationship, but I never really mentioned it, or I never wanted kids. I mean, I have couples who separate because they realize quite a far way in that actually one of them does not want children, for example. So at the core of it is we're not conscious enough about relationships. We're not having the important conscious conversation about how to create a specific relationship that's for you and that works for you. And then get into a habit of every year, sit down and take a view on that. You know, is it still valid? Do I still want to recommit to you? Rather than expect that because we said yes, you know, a while back, this is enough to create the bond, which it isn't. So on one end, there is redefining monogamous relationships so that maybe we can have more successful rates amongst those. And then, as you said, there is new models. I think the younger generation, which is much more fluid with its way of thinking and also its way of identifying, is rejecting a lot of the stuff that statistically isn't really working and doesn't really fit them, and are looking for alternative ways. I would say there's two branches. One is the open relationship, which is a very big bucket because open just means we open to defining what that is. Whether it's monogamous, whether it's we bring people into the relationship, whether it's we do that and we can also both, whether we communicate around this so we don't tell each other. There's lots of variations around what that can be. And then there is the polyamorous model, which often for me is more polyagony than polyamory because it's very difficult to do this well. It requires a very evolved person to be managing multiple relationships and to do this with an open heart, which is what polyamory is: multiple love. You have in-love feelings with multiple people. You engage with your heart open. It's not just sleeping around, you know. So these are challenging models that I think we haven't really yet found that many examples where this works. But I have met people that are very much naturally polyamorous. They've always known it. They've always wanted to be with multiple people. And I talk to them a lot because I'm not like this maybe yet, or maybe I don't understand, or maybe I will never be like that. But it's very interesting for me to hear their experience of having this multiple ways that they could be involved in loving relationship with multiple people. It's something very new as a model for relationship, even though it's probably not new historically, but I do think that it's relatively new. So apart from this open model, which again, there is not a lot of resources around how to do this well, I find that the other aspect that's changing is identification to types of sexuality. I think more and more it's acceptable for you to today want to be with a man and tomorrow with a woman. And it doesn't define who you are. It's just a kind of where you're at. And that I think is a very positive change for people to have the space to explore themselves away from, you know, the way that in the past you have to choose. What are you? Are you, you know, able to sleep with one person or different people? So I think that's one of the changes that's happened that's positive, definitely.
I guess I had a question for you. I actually have like 50,000 questions now, so we're not going to have time to get to all of them, I'm afraid. But yeah, I guess I have a sense right now. Like we were at this festival, Medicine Festival, which felt like there was like 1.3 women to every man there. And I noticed, what's that?
That's nice.
Yeah, but I also noticed that there were like a few people having like freakouts. Like one guy climbed up on a tent. They're always the men. And I felt like it was also a no alcohol festival. And I felt like in a way, like the men didn't really maybe even know how to deal with the sort of rising of the feminine energy. And I guess there's a little bit of a sense right now, which we could look at in different ways, that women are kind of like pulling ahead, like they're doing more work on themselves, and men are, and you were saying like if, you know, men who don't want to date women or don't want to date women but can, why aren't they at this festival? Like, what, you know, why, you know, so it's like, yeah, we see like in the US, I think 70% of women are now college graduates. 70% of college graduates are now women. And all these like changes are happening as women equalize economic power. That's leading to them, like men now have more body dysmorphia because if a woman has an equal amount of economic power, she no longer is looking for a provider. She's looking more for like, you know, a trophy boyfriend. But then a lot of men are kind of retracting and becoming kind of like incels in the US and moving back into their parents' basements and, you know, getting involved with like Trump and the far right and so on. I'm just kind of curious, what do you see happening in this sense? It's more like sociological anthropology. What do you think could be done, or what would be an approach to kind of healing this? It just feels like the divide between men and women is actually growing, and leading to a lot of women and men feeling alone, and then leading to the you know, the lack of sex and all this stuff, or lack of intimacy. You know.
Yeah. So at the core is that we do not have the right narrative around what it means to be a man or woman and what it means to come together. The idea of masculine and feminine energy are not integrated in most people's minds. They don't really know what that means and how to access it and what to do with that. So again, the individual has to do the work and evolve through this inner marriage between their masculine and their feminine before they will be effective in coming into relationship, especially as you say, access is much greater than before. We have more choice. We have more desires. We have more expectations. We have, the world has become, you know, much more open. And so with that, people are having children much later. Actually, having sex is no longer the most productive way to reproduce. You know, a lot of people have to use other manners. So sex, it's time, is about to move into a new era where sex is about actualization. It's about revealing more of life to you as you go into this introspective research within yourself. And so what I've noticed is that, yes, women are starting to accept and understand, because they are given a little bit more permission to do so, that their sexuality is not at service of neither reproduction or the pleasure of men, which, if I simplify, for a very long time, it has been the case. And that there is a new definition for a lot of women, that sexual energy is about them being sexual being, and moving that energy inside their body is not anything to do with another person. Primarily, it's a singular experience with yourself. It's to be in intimacy with life through building layers of connection with your body, with your emotion, with your pleasure. The more you connect, the more intimate you are with life when it comes to this kind of avenue. And so I see a few things. I see that we do not have coming of age rituals, which means that very often a man, I'm generalizing, a man would become a man from a boy, but there will be no one really giving them responsibility and accountability for that, apart from telling them, oh, you're 18, now you can drink or drive a car, right? So the fact that men are not going through rituals of actualization as men is also resulting in a lot of boys in men's body who are still very focused in a relatively immature desire and fantasy world that is about goal-oriented sexuality, that is focused on penetration, where there's a lot of friction, and then there is an ejaculation, and that's the programming. That's the programming in their masturbation, and it's the programming in the sex they're having. The alternative to this will be initiations, you know, to sexual energy as an internal force, and starting to cultivate as a young man semen retention, edging, and building an experience of your sexual energy where you're not constantly leaking it out from the bottom, but you're holding it up and starting to work with it, so that your tolerance for pleasure and sexual desire starts to grow and settle within yourself, so that every time you have an arousal thought, you just want to went quickly to porn because it's like an itch that you need to get rid of that energy because it's uncomfortable and you've been told, well, you can't be aroused at work, you can't be aroused around people you don't know, you can't touch you, so we have a lot of restrictions, which is twisting us to actually understand this will change when we have more capacity for it, when we are able to hold more of that pleasure inside us, we will master ourselves, because sexual energy, as you know, is prana, is life force. It has a lot of benefits for us to evolve and grow and mature if we can experience it. If we keep the basic approach to sexual energy is a sexual need and it's an urge to release, then we are not going to evolve because this energy is just not being used and helping us actualize. So that's one thing for the men that I think they need to do the work. They need to do men's work. They need to do into groups of men where they have rituals and where they can express their emotions, where they get to connect with who they are. Maybe they have a quest around, this idea of the man coming of age, going on a vision quest and taking himself to the edge of himself to be able to own the right to go into the next stage of life. And I think for women who are more naturally drawn into the internal experience, who often have more of that cyclic, because we have cycles, so we connected very much to the earth. And so there's things that happen to us that maybe are kind of can be completely unseen by men in their evolution. I think with women, we have this thing happening around us. And now that the world is allowing us to be more expressed, what we need are spaces for women to be able to be sexually expressed without it being turned into a sexual object. And this is what I try to do in my retreats. I told you I do retreats now where I bring 20 people together and I put people in situation where we're going to be witnessing sexual energy in the body of a woman. And I think most people in their entire life have never seen what it's like for a woman to be sexually expressed outside of a sexual context. It's extremely rare, and it's a unique witnessing of sexual energy. And as you also know, we have two main center. We have Shakti and Shiva. Shiva is the masculine energy, come from the crown. Shakti is the feminine energy, Kundalini energy, comes from the root. And that energy, if it's not able to rise and express itself, it's creating an imbalance in the world for having too much masculine energy, simply by expression. So it's important. And when you go to certain places and do, sexuality retreat, or we go into ISTA and other organization, we get to see that. We get to be in a sexual space where sexual energy is primarily something I experience with myself. And I'm allowed to express it without this being understood to be anything else than I'm enjoying my own sexual energy. And that's something that does not depend on a partner. And that's if we understand that sexual energy primarily is a solo experience of self and an opportunity to investigate who we are and what are our desires and how what turns us on and what are our kinks, then it's going to be very hard to then have people come together in union and be satisfied with what the other party is bringing to the party. Because if a lot of women are doing this work now, as you say, these festivals and many places, I live in Ibiza, there's a lot of women who are empowering themselves with different practices and starting to really go into this. And I think men are struggling to also find the places and organizations that offer something that they connect with, because not all men want to go and start screaming and doing primal rituals. It's not for everyone. Yeah, you can't stand up. Yeah, so we need to create, those spaces. My son is 19, and my son and I are creating a coming of age retreat for 19 to 21, which basically will be tools, like embodiment tools, how to breathe, how to communicate verbally, non-verbally, sexuality, intimacy, just like a toolkit of the stuff that, of course, we should be learning, but we're still not learning at all.
So you've enrolled your son in your cult, in other words.
He wants to do it. I guess it's my idea.
Yeah, because I've been working with ISTA a bit. You mentioned ISTA. I can't remember if you've actually gone through their program.
No, not yet. No.
I mean, I think I did scream and stuff during then, primarily do things in ISTA. So I guess I have done some of that. Yeah, no, I resonate with a lot of what you're saying there. I mean, that was like something when I wrote my first book about psychedelic shamanism. I guess I was looking for initiation without even knowing what it was, because this wasn't even something that my culture had as an idea. So I ended up going to Gabon and going through the Iboga initiation with the Bwiti and, visiting visiting a indigenous culture in the Amazon and Ecuador, the Sequoia and so on. And finally had this breakthrough. But then it was really actually in ISTA. The first time I did it was about 5 years ago. I really had a profound experience of, they do these sort of exercises around, as a man, kind of recognizing your inner woman, your inner feminine, and vice versa. I just realized, I think I'm somebody who, has a lot of feminine energy in a way, but I'd suppress that because that would seem like the survival, like if I wanted to get what, quote unquote, get what I want, and, so I sort of ended up embodying a lot of these sort of toxic masculine tendencies, just because that seemed what you had to do, to get what you wanted to survive, back in the 90s in New York. And I sort of had, it's like a constant process of like peeling away that stuff. You mentioned a little bit, but I'm kind of curious. I mean, there's different views, I guess, on the distinctions between masculine and feminine energy. How would you, David Deida talked about that a lot in his work, but that seems a little dated now. How do you, how do you see that?
Well, first, it's the most interesting for me, fascinating aspect of the whole conversation. It's the one that helps unite with research about consciousness and quantum physics. That there is polarity is at the core of everything, as we know, because without polarity, the energy just can't direct itself. So it's very important for us to start having a much deeper understanding of what it means polarity. When you're talking about the Medicine Festival, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was wonderful. But one thing I did mention to you and I noticed is it was neutralized, because very often spirituality does not really reconcile with other archetypes. So I said that the goddess needs to reconcile with the slut. We cannot leave her out. We still have this sassy, provoking, whore, slut-like aspect of being a woman, that when we take that out of the equation, we neutralize both the woman and the man. And then the man himself,
No, I was going to say, on the other side, and the man also has an aspect of being the hunter, right? Like, I mean, that's a legitimate part of a masculine way.
Yes. And it's important to be aware of our history and to understand how we are made, as you say, in terms of like attraction and what drives us. Because for the longest time, what was driving us was an urge to reproduce. And this is a very particular type of polarity, which often is a man's desire, is hunting nature, and a woman being chosen. She's not choosing in a way, And so I think there is, for polarity's sake, what I find is important is to understand almost the metaphysics of polarity. What does that actually mean? And this is the idea that, and there is some really interesting practical work around archetype that, for example, will say that if you go into a master energy, it might naturally put your partner into a maiden energy. And that if you go into a more submissive energy, it might give a chance for your partner to embrace some of their masculine traits. So you were talking about toxic masculinity. I, like you, went into toxic masculine traits as a woman who wanted to have a career in architecture and then in technology. I felt I had to embrace how to be a man in order to be accepted and be able to function in certain sectors and ways of life. So the toxic masculinity isn't about men. It is just something that's happening to a lot of people and also to women, this excessive masculine aspect. So the repairing for me that I notice is to work a lot with couples and trying to explain to them that the same way the space between two particles is what creates the tension between them, the intimacy and the quality of the sexual tension will depend on how you treat the space between you and your partner. And if you're not intentional with what you're putting in the space, you will not create the effect that you're looking for, because it is a dance between the two. One behavior and one energy will call in another energy. For example, if you are around the fire, you know, your energy as a woman, your energy will move because the fire is creating the polarity for the water. And we are water, for example. So that's why there's a lot of women's circle and rituals that happen around fire, because it activates the opposite in a sense. So it's always thinking about what is the polarity you want to create. If you come in this specific way with your partner, what's your intention? Like, what are you really trying to create in that space? If we just rely on attraction, that's physical, that's likely to become not sufficient over time. And that's sometimes how attraction in relationship fades, because we are not able to have other types of attractions. And polarity is a way to create attraction that is much more energetic. So that's not to do with the way you look. And you do this at ISTA and in a lot of other places. They teach you and you learn to work with anyone, regardless of whether you're attracted to them. Because if you can create polarity, then the attraction will happen naturally. You will be able to move energy, even though you don't have physical attraction for those people. And because we are so visually stimulated, because so much of our referential, our stimuli, our triggers, are visual images, and because we spend so much time in our head, we are not able to connect from another place. So again, the embodiment work, which is the other facet of intimacy, really is how connected are you to your body? How can you, are you feeling? Are you sensorial? Are you sensual? Are you able to feel yourself from another place of thinking about how you feel, but really feeling? And starting to have practices, you know, you're talking about, sometimes we talk about eye gazing, we talk about, you know, Tantra as a reference. All Tantra is doing is trying to help you connect to the energetic polarity that sits within yourself so that it can create an effect on another person. That's really what it's trying to work through. So I would say polarity is first preparing the body, being able to charge yourself with energy. If you ejaculate every day, it's going to be very hard for you to create polarity. You do not have energy inside your body. If you have orgasm that are very quick, peak orgasm that are kind of go high very quickly, and then there is a refractory period, for example, rather than focusing on pleasure and increasing your capacity for pleasure, that's actually what's charging you with energy. And then when you retain it and when you hold the charge, that's when attraction happens. For example, if you're in a relationship, if you want to create polarity, you have to be very clear you have super strong desire for your partner, but you're not acting on it. That's what's going to make them come to you, because they want to be desires, but they want to have the time to wake up their own attraction through your resistance so that they can then feel the attraction, and then they can go towards what they want, which is often what happens in relationship, is that one person wants sex more than the other, one person is always initiating, and the other person has loss of desire or doesn't feel really interested in sex in the same way, and then these people are not meeting. So there needs to be awareness for the fact that retaining energy is attraction. You know, there's only two ways with energy. You can push or you can pull. If you are holding energy inside you, you pull me towards you. If you are pushing against me, all I can do is be in this receptive place. So always ask yourself, am I pushing energy or am I pulling energy? And that's attraction, that's polarity that you can create. That's why it's physics. A lot of it is really physics. You know, me, I explain a lot of these complex concepts with simple physics, because it helps people understand, okay, what do I do? Well, you need to treat the space better between you and your partner, how intentional you are with touch. Are you teasing them? Are you trying to wake them up, but you're holding yourself back? How you are acting in the space in order to start creating the polarity is an every moment awareness. You know, you need to be present in order to create it. It won't happen otherwise. Does that make sense to you?
Of course. I mean, I just have so many different questions. My thoughts are like flying off in different directions. We only have a little bit of time left. I know you got to take your son to university, but I was kind of curious. I heard in this other podcast you're talking about what's the problem with the recent developments in the design of bikinis and underwear?
Oh, well, I mean, I have a lot of reflections. That's why this topic is such a brilliant, as you know, because you've got into it too, a brilliant place to explore our culture. And I've realized that there is an issue with nudity and the fact that we have a lot of shame about the naked body. And in Puritanist culture or certain religious culture, it's extreme. But even in France, you know, I didn't show my boobs on the beach. It was not accepted in my family to do that, right? So there's still a huge amount of ideas around the body. And I just noticed that as we have sexualized our culture, we have also made the genitals more and more what's connected to sex. And I noticed this through the evolution of swimwear, where, let's say, at least for women, we used to have quite big swimsuit that covers a lot of the body. And then now it's become extremely small. We're covering vaguely the nipple. And I mean, there's like something in the butt, right? It's tiny, 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 tiny. And I think it's completely fucking with our psyche, because we have this obsession with these nipples and the genitals as the sexual parts of the body, which means that one, the rest of the body is not considered sexual. And very often you can have an encounter with a man and they'll think that 1, 2, and 3 is the code. Nipple, nipple, pussy. You know, they think that's how you get someone excited for sex. So the cultural changes that I notice in, you know, bikinis and underwears, actually also for me in my field, we don't recommend to wear underwear, because again, it creates that separation between genitals and the rest of the body. And the other thing that it does, it normalizes body types, because as soon as you put line on the body, it creates a format and a standard for how it should look. And it means that we have less acceptance over the diversity of bodies, because we want them to fit into those specific shape that help you demark the standard that we want to identify to. So there's a lot of blind spots, is always the way I think of it, when it comes to sexuality, that are very much invisible to a lot of people unless you start looking at it in a great detail. So these things just come to my awareness because I just realize how obsessed, and I see obviously with Instagram, where I'm shadow banned and having lots of problems to grow on the platform, that we don't take responsibility for those problems. You know, we are not really looking into this as an issue. And then socially, it does impact us. Relationally, it does impact us. It actually changes our behavior towards each other. And it's also changing our psychic, you know, the fantasy, the turn on are starting to become completely overly focused on a small area of the body, which is not sustainable. That's so much energy. Your entire arousal is focused on such small parts of the body. It's just not a healthy way to think of sexuality.
Yeah. You're reminding me a little bit of, as I said, I have too many thoughts in too many directions. We'll have to have a longer chat. But Herbert Marcuse, did you ever hear of him? He was like a Frankfurt School philosopher. I wrote a book called Eros and Civilization back in the 50s. And he thought that the liberation of sexuality would lead to more like polymorphous, you know, sexuality, not so focused on the genitalia, but more like an open field playfulness. And then when the sexual revolution happened in the 60s and 70s, he was very disappointed. And he actually coined a term called, well, he sort of mixed Freud and Marx in interesting ways, but he coined a term repressive desublimation. So essentially like, you know, Freud wrote about sublimation, right? That like, you know, that civilization required channeling the sex drive into like building, you know, factories and cathedrals and all of that stuff. We were cut off, you know, it had to, and that was like why all the shame and all the religion and everything. And so with the 60s and 70s, when industrial civilization had reached a certain level of affluence and so on, you know, there was a kind of pulling back on the sublimation, and it allowed for this desublimation where sexuality abuse, there was the sexual liberation and so on. But Marcuse felt that instead of that happening in a way that led to like a true kind of revolutionary or radical kind of openness or transformation of social forms, but it's like repressive desublimation, where like, people were, free to have more sexual experience, but it was still underneath this kind of repressive, kind of like, authoritarian, in some sense, model, like MTV Spring Break or something. And maybe, where it's not really connected to some kind of more deep expression of life force energy or something like that,
Yeah, I mean, I see one of the main trends, distortions, is actually psychoanalysis. I think that we have overly indexed into information coming from the intellect, and that we are very much valuing in our society creation that comes from, an intellectual cerebral place, and the somatic experience, the somatic healing, the somatic therapy was rejected by Freud. And as you know, Carl Jung and others, William Reich, had a much more integrated vision around this idea that trauma is much more bioenergetic than it was psychoanalytic. It is an energetic process that happens in the body, and there's a lot of evidence and there's a lot of knowledge and there's so much information about this that makes a lot of sense, and it is still not really prevailing the therapeutic field. The somatic therapy is just starting to come to our awareness and at scale. We still do not integrate it in the process of therapy within the medical field. The very, very few of those somatic therapies are seen. It's an illegal practice to do sexology body working, which is when you use somatic to actually take the trauma away from, let's say, the genitals. So one of the, I think, necessary evolution is that we reconcile with the idea that, again, the body is a unit, and it is not just happening in the head, that we have different intelligence center. One of them is the brain, another one is the genital, another one is what's happening in our guts. Another one could be the information come from the heart. There is an institute called the HeartMath Institute, which is really doing amazing research in that field. We are not there yet. We are still obsessed with this idea that it comes from here. And again, I believe that this is an evolution of control, that if we are in our head, we're very easy to control. We're very easy to create fear, to create shame. And that then guides our behaviors. And it's much easier that way, that when you start landing into your body using the other center of intelligence, you have other types of information that gets revealed to you. And it is another form of awakening. It's also another form of consciousness. Sometimes I worry that a lot of people who make the biggest decision in our world are in their head. They don't have embodiment as part of their life. They don't connect with their heart center. They are not actualized sexually, and yet they are defining where the world is going. I'm not sure that's really helpful. So I feel that the shift is happening in the medical field now, where we know that emotion turns into disease. So we now have agreed to the fact that if we're not well emotionally and mentally, it will create some knock-on effect on our health. It can turn into disease and illnesses. That's already a big shift. It wasn't like this, when I grew up, there was no awareness around that. So I think that's a positive change. The next step is to start working with the body. Now we know it's where things are getting stuck. Then it's really recovering those practices and helping people understand, which is what I believe, that life is a practice, and it's by changing habits that we change behaviors, and that's how we can transform. There is not thinking about it. Thinking about it is not going to get you there.
Okay, we only have a few more minutes left. I know you have to take your kid to school, but what about what's been some of the what's been for you? What was one of the most surprising discoveries that went against your intuition or against maybe what you expected when you got into this research, when you created the app? Is there something where you were like, wow, I had no idea that was the situation?
Honestly, Daniel, I mean, I had my mind blown so many times because the layers are so deep. It is actually connected to a lot of things. And I do really believe that it's an evolutionary thing we need to go through. I mean, biggest realizations. My God. I mean, I had so many. The inner marriage of the masculine and feminine being an experience with self, was one of the bigger pieces. The level of constructs and program that I was under, that I had to confront and lift in order to get to the next stage. So there's so many things. Masturbation, not to be understood to be a form of self-care, and how do you use it to be better rather than use it in a way that doesn't serve you. The amount of limitation coming from the industry. I cannot express myself on platforms today. I cannot acquire customers. I cannot use words like orgasm and anal and squirting and sex. And I cannot do that without, which is the case, still I'm shadow banned. You can't find me on any platforms if you look for my name or the company name. So it is deeply rooted still. We think we're making so much progress, but then we look around and it's not really happening quite yet. So I think there's still a lot of things for me to discover. It's a journey that never seems to end, this one.
Very cool. And we'll obviously put it in the captions, whatever, but if you want to tell people how they find you, how they get through the shadow ban, how they find the app.
Yeah, so the best way would be to look on Google for kama.lab, which will then lead you to my Instagram account. I do a lot of free education there. The posts are proper piece of information and proper practical, and you can really learn a lot. And then if you're ready, and I will give your audience 50% off for the yearly subscription to the app. So I'm hoping that people will take this as a chance to try it. The app is really the first step. If you're curious about any of the things we discussed and you've been looking for a resource to start the journey into, okay, what does that mean to be sexually more aware, then I would say the app is a great place to go. And that's Kama, K-A-M-A, on both the App Store and Google Play.
Excellent. And how do they get the 50% off or whatever?
Well, should I send you the link and you can put it in the post of the podcast?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll probably do a transcript of the whole thing too. Okay, Chloe, so happy to see you again. Look forward to hanging out.
Thank you.
Hope to visit Ibiza and we get some chance to hang out in person. Yeah, really, really great to hear your thoughts and your wisdom today. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thanks, Daniel. Loved it.
Catch up.